Put on the red light. What's up, Blind Golf Academy members and guests? And it's a late night video tonight. Just shows you how much I care because we're doing this at 2 in the morning. Not really. I think it's 2 in the morning in New York, but over here it's a late night anyway. This is one of our former students, and the parents sent me and my other coach his video because he's got a little bit of the Shanks going on, and I thought, this is actually a good idea for a video that not all Shanks are created equal, and we're going to talk about it today. And I got my red light going on here, and no, Roxanne wasn't here. And for those of you who know who Roxanne is, put it in the comments to make me feel not so old. But let's talk about Shanks, why your Shank is different than his Shank, and why we shouldn't even be thinking about Shanks. Instead, we should be focusing on short game and putting. So in golf, we are suffering from 2 Shanks. It is either the toe shank or the hosel fade, I like to call it. It's actually hosel shank, but it hits the very edge of your club, right where the shaft leads into it. Toe shank is probably a little bit more rare. Most of us suffer from the heel shanks. Most of the time, it has to do with plane work and running out of room. So we're going to talk about what is causing this shank directly and how I would address it with him to get him to make a couple of changes. But we're going to learn about his overall swing too and see why all of a sudden he'll just shank one out of nowhere. And it's typically when he plays more tournaments. And from what I understand from his parents and from my coach is that he is right in the middle of tournament season. So he's playing a lot more than practicing. And this is normal. When you play more, you start to get a little bit sloppy, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that you get more comfortable and you start to do things and things creep up out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it creeps up to the point where you just can't get away with it. But let's take a look at what is really going on. And there is some camera shift in this video, so it's hard to tell the spine angle retention, but we're going to do our best. And let's just basically look at the way he is set up initially and talk about why things are occurring. So if we take a look at his lower plane line and his upper plane line, we can really see that there's not a lot of playroom here as opposed to traditional. So this is borderline one plane setup. However, he actually does something interesting. He goes back to a 2-plane in his downswing and gets his plane line lower at impact than it was at the start of the swing. Typically, it's the other way around. Typically, we raise our hands slightly to account for the shaft droop and also our driving of our body. He actually lowers his plane, which is quite unusual. And I believe a lot of this has to do with clubs as he grew up. I know he has been around the game for a while. And at one point in time, maybe he played clubs that are a little too heavy for him. And we see this first move, we see that right there. We see the club being picked up by the hands, and the hands and arms are working outward as opposed to turning. So outward basically means they're moving along this area initially, and they come out and above that plane, and the club will fall below the plane as it's trying to find the plane. So we have a couple things going at it. Now, what directly attributes this, besides the hands and arms lifting, because maybe at one point in time the club is too heavy, is his shoulders. So his shoulders actually flatten out. Now, we do have some issues with the camera angle, so what we'll do is this. We're going to do a degree from the eyeballs. Let's do it in red because the red's a lot easier to see. From eyeballs down to golf ball. Okay, and we don't really care about the number. We're just looking at the line. And now we get down to here, and we can see eyeball to golf ball. So we see how much shorter he has to deal with. And we're not talking about the angles here. Let's zoom in and make sure I'm showing you the same thing, is we are talking about the length of the line. So he was this far away as he started his backswing, and he's this far away at the top of his swing in his transition. So we can see by lifting the hands up and away and flattening your shoulder turn as a result, all of a sudden you start dipping towards the golf ball. When you dip towards the golf ball, you are now taking away some real estate, some precious real estate, because we need as much room as we had when we started to strike the golf ball. And if we keep going down through, we see, look at that right elbow. It gets to a point where, hey, I've run out of room. I can't do much. So what does he have to do now? He has to clear his hips very quickly. He has to pull back very quickly to give him a fighting chance. And he's a pretty good athlete. So he figures a way to try to save it. So now we start to see the pulling back. You see the whole body's moving back and away from the golf ball to provide that last second spacing. He gets a little bit of spacing, but take a look at where he is. He strikes the ball right on that hosel. And remember, look at all the real estate he lost. He lost a lot of real estate. So if he were able to maintain that real estate, he probably would hit this pretty well. But now we have to look at where does that stem from. So now let's go back even further and let's look at the setup and look at what seems to be a little bit out of whack here. And this is typical when you start to play a lot. You start to just get a little bit too comfortable with your setup and you're not as disciplined by the way you set up for every shot. So we see feet are facing to the right, hips are slightly facing left, shoulders are slightly left of the target as well. So we have three areas. The knees are a little bit left. So we have these lines that are a little bit crooked back and forth, but the biggest one is the shoulders. So if the shoulders are slightly open before you take the club away, your hand path is going to be a little bit up and out as well. So that's why I said it could have been his clubs when he was younger as heavy clubs, but it may also be the setup that gets his hands to pull back and out, and that's going to force his whole body to fall towards his toes, and then he's trapped. He's run out of real estate, so he learns how to pull back and try and fight it. But let's also do a quick double check on his centeredness. So we see his X, where the spine angle and also his lower plane line meet are going to be quite high. So we see that's his centeredness based on where everything meets. Now if we draw a line from the arches of his heels straight up to the sky, we can see his right foot is behind, his left foot is ahead. So technically he probably feels pretty centered because they're offsetting each other, but this could also create some issues because if you take a look at his backswing, the amount of hip turn is not quite deep enough. Now if we take a look at the turn of the hips don't quite turn deep enough for my liking, but he does a pretty good job of getting the club behind the centeredness. So even if we redraw where his centeredness is from his both arches, we can see that his club is well behind the center, which is key. So once you've established your hands in this top position, now you're ready to go. Okay, so this next swing is actually one that he hit pretty well, and we can see that his feet are still a little out of whack. We see that right knee kicking down, left knee straightening up, but now it gets back into somewhat normal position. We do, however, see a lack of hip turn on the way back, but he is very young and he's able to do that with the elasticity of his body. So let's make sure we draw some plane lines for you to see, and the upper plane line, we can see how tight again, and this is pretty close to one plane, but we do have a compensatory motion that gets it to two plane throughout the whole swing. But let's take a look at, as we take that club back, we can see that the hands will venture out away from that line initially, and we can see as a result hands are going up, club head is going to pull back behind to offset that. Now he did a pretty good job here of not losing a lot of real estate, but you can still see it here. If we draw an arrow right where his eyes are, look, they still get closer as he gets to the top of the swing. So his whole body is moving still towards the golf ball, but he does a good job. And I think this is where his body has just learned to take care of this. And again, this could be a heavy club or it could just be misalignment, but take a look at the top of the swing here. We see where his butt of the club is. It's actually in a pretty good position in terms of the centeredness. So he's done a really good job here of rerouting, and you can see his butt of the club has met the centeredness of where he is set up. However, the club now is falling slightly below plane at this point. And I'll show you why this is important, because as he feels this, that club now is well below his plane. He's got an open club face, but he's done a good job of sitting, and now he's pulling back away to make sure he has enough room. So if we go down to impact, all of a sudden we can see daylight here between his elbow and his hip, where the other swing, it was crammed against his body. As a result, he's still created that nice pathway, plenty of real estate, and look where he struck the golf ball right in the center. A lot of hip rotation, a lot of moving. So for him to get his swing to work, he needs to, and he does a great job of getting further away with his lower body. And we see that by this elongation of his left leg and his whole left side of his body. And he's learned to open up to help square that club face and somewhat hold off a release, because he can't quite release the club when the club is open so much and he's turning his body over over to square that club face. I just want to take a look and show you how much shoulder tilt he's established. To show you where he should be at the top of his swing, we're going to eyeball this, but it's going to be pretty close. We're going to do about 90 degrees from that spine angle. If we go to the top of his swing, we can see immediately we're getting that left shoulder to kick up, and this is what brings his club very flat. But if we go to the top of the swing, what we're going to do is see how much of an angle he can create. So at the top of his swing, it is looking right about 23 degrees. As he gets down into impact, watch how much tilt he actually generates just past impact here. So now we look at this new tilt, and he is at 52 degrees. So he's about 30 degrees, which is okay. So you can see that he is able to manipulate the body correctly. It just looks a little bit off. Now, that doesn't mean it is wrong, because he is able to do this for his parents to watch out. You really have to focus on your posture, where that ball position is related to the center of your chest. How do you get centered in your swing? Remain centered. Try not to shift forward and back. One thing I would really recommend for this first initial takeaway is working on that left shoulder, staying more in line with his spine angle to keep it relative to his spine angle. This will bring the hands much closer to that plane line, and then you can work on hinging the club correctly to stay on that plane line and keep the club a little bit more above the plane line instead of this rerouting constantly. It is a good swing for what it is now. You can still play at a pretty high level with this swing, but it all comes down to your misses. And if you do shank one every now and then, it is going to be tough to play competitive golf over 4 days. Now, just to show you, obviously, this is a driver and this is a very powerful swinger, but we have the same thing with Bryson. We don't have a lot of real estate here to work with in terms of our plane, but look at how much he has in this area here. Now, the key thing for Bryson is maintaining that. So as he takes that club back, you can see the hands are the most important thing to stay on that line while he elongates it, gets a nice width of arc. We can see how straight those arms are, gets that top plane line pretty well. We can see that his shoulder tilt number, to compare our young superstar with the current superstar, he is at 29 degrees. As he gets down into impact, we can see just past impact here, it should probably be 60 or so, and it's at 58, so about that 30 degrees. So the tilting is not an issue, it's the motion. And we can see, look at all this real estate that Bryson has, and he can retain this angle here. Watch one frame, you can see that stored up angle at the right elbow, boom. That's when he releases it, delivers all that power, and rotates through. But lastly, let's just check where the centerness of both heels are. We can see there's one center, and it's right there. So we don't need the second center. And we're going to look at where is that spine angle, and it's pretty close to where everything is lined up. And the key thing that Bryson does at the top of the swing, watch his hands. His hands will drop straight down and meet right where everything meets here. That's where your hands should be, and they should remain on that line. And we can see the next frame, they remain on that line, where our junior, the hands were not remaining on that line, they were going below, and that's trouble with an iron as you age. So you can never get your hands below this plane line. If you get your hands below the plane line, it's going to be trouble for you. So I hope that helps you. Hope that helps you identify no two shanks are alike, and if you do shank it, send me a video. I'll help you out, because we're trying to do more live posts, and I'll even put on the red light for you. Put on the red light. Fairways and greens.